friends. Welcome to Tcu Herpetology. Come on in. I'm going to give you a little quick tour of herpetology. We're going to work our way back to the collection because that's where all the excitement is, where we have over 300,000 specimens of pickled reptiles and amphibians. On the way there, we're going to make a little detour through the wet lab. This wet lab is a space where we do a lot of our research. So this space is where we do our work. It's called the wet lab because we work with wet specimens. Why are they wet? Because they're soaking in alcohol. That's how we preserve them. Quentin over here is working on describing a new species of snake from the Philippines. He's got his calipers out doing some measurements. Sorry to interrupt you, Quentin. Over here, you could see a whole bunch of other research projects that are ongoing. Actually, these are just jars that we're topping off. So a lot of these jars, one of our big jobs is to make sure all the jars have enough alcohol. So you can see this jar is getting a little bit low. We brought it in here to top it off. That's why all these jars are here, actually. We're just doing basic collection maintenance work. All right, let's head back to the main space. So again, this is where we do a lot of our research. We pull specimens out, we curate them. We do research like Quentin's doing. He's just measuring snakes, counting their scales, seeing if we should be describing new species of snake from the Philippines. And once we go through this door, we're back out in the hallway, and we're about to go into the really cool spot. You ready for the big reveal? Here we go. Boom. So this space is where we house over 300,000 pickled reptile amphibian specimens. There's actually several floors of this. And if you look behind me, we have all these compacted shelving. This is just the lizard section. So all this whole row behind me are just lizards. And on the other side of those are the frogs. We actually have the largest collection of neotropical frogs anywhere in the world. So we're just going to round the corner here. I just showed you where the lizards are. We just walked past those. As we head toward this part of our collection, we're seeing more lizards on one side. And we're going to see this next row. That's where all of our amphibians are. And you're going to see rows of compactors running down the aisle. All of those compactors there are full of frogs. And the left side is all salamanders. This is the part of the collection where we house the very first specimen of a new species. So this is our collection of holotypes. And each individual specimen in this part of the museum represents the very first specimen of a new species that was ever described. If you see, we give them a little extra love. They get a nice little red ribbon on the jar there, which indicates the special nature of each of these individual specimens. If anyone in the world ever wants to know exactly what the snake Geophis bellus looks like, they got to come here and look at this exact specimen. This is the holotype, the very first, the specimen upon which the description of this species is based. And we have hundreds of them. Frogs, salamanders, lizards, snakes. These are all of our holotypes here at KU. I'm Rich Glor, curator of herpetology here at KU, and we are in the KU Herpetology Collections. And this represents the 4th largest collection of reptiles and amphibians anywhere in the United States. And what I want to do today is show you some of the amazing adaptations that the reptiles and amphibians here in our collection possess. All right, so if you're a fan of KU in any way, you're probably a fan of basketball, okay? And that's why I want to show you this species. Because this is a species that has a ton of amazing adaptations. And if you're a basketball fan, you might recognize this as the mascot of one of our opponents, okay? The Tcu Horned Frogs. This is a horned frog. I got some bad news for TCU fans. This is not a frog, it's a lizard. It's a horned lizard. It has scales, it doesn't have those giant frog legs. It's not even an amphibian, okay? So why am I showing you this horned frog here, aside from to make fun of TCU for having a mascot that's mislabeled? Adaptations. This thing has so many amazing adaptations. Horned lizards are very highly specialized for a specific kind of existence. And here's what they do. They like to eat ants. Now, ants are terrible nutritionally. So if you want to eat ants, you have to eat a lot of them. That's good because ants are social. You can find them in big clusters. The problem is if you're a predator and you're just sitting there all day eating ants without really moving around, you're really exposed to all the other predators out there. They're just going to swoop in and pick you off. So check this out. These spines on their head here, this is why they're called horned lizards. These guys are all covered with spines. And these are the kind of spines and protection that you need if you want to be a little tank. If you want to be able to sit in the middle of the desert eating ants all day long and not have to worry so much about a pesky bird coming down and swallowing you. And there's actually been some amazing studies of these adaptations that have shown that the length of these spines determines how likely they are to be eaten. It's an amazing study, a really amazing study, because the way they did this was they studied shrikes are a kind of bird that eats lizards. And when they eat them, they spear them onto barbed wire or other posts, spines out in the desert. So if you walk around there, you can measure the length of the spines on the lizards that have been eaten by the shrikes. And you can also measure the length of the spines of the other lizards that are living in that community. And when researchers did this, they found that those that are getting eaten by birds actually have significantly shorter spines than the rest of the population. So there's one example of an amazing adaptation that helps keep them safe while they're gorging on ants. Now, the next adaptation I'm going to talk about is even more amazing, because it turns out these are desert-dwelling animals. They live in very arid environments in most cases, and they actually have this amazing engineering adaptation. This lizard can drink from wet sand. And the way that it can drink from wet sand is basically just by plopping its legs down in it. All of the scales all across its back have a very unique structure that allows and actually encourages water to flow from the legs and across the back into the mouth. So if this guy's hungry in the desert, he doesn't even have to go find a pool to lick water up. He's just got to find a moist patch, and that water is going to wick up through capillary action across his scales and into its mouth. One of the best known reptiles in the world is the snake. Everybody knows snakes. And the reason that everybody knows snakes is because most people are scared of snakes. Why are people scared of snakes? I don't really know, but part of the reason is because they don't have legs. And people just find that really creepy. Why don't they have legs? So if you imagine, if you're spending your life in burrows or underground, having these huge legs flopping around and arms, that's not really to your benefit. You want to reduce those so you can sneak into these tiny little spaces. Now, here's the cool thing. As an adaptation, we don't often think of losing things as an adaptation, but in snakes and a lot of other reptiles, losing their legs was a really important adaptation. And I'm going to show you one of the weirdest, partially limbless reptiles in the world. And the great thing about reptiles is snakes are not the only reptiles that have lost their limbs over time. This has happened dozens of times, and to different degrees. And what makes this one weird is, look, it has no hind limbs, so it's completely lost its hind limbs, and has these tiny, kind of pathetic T-Rex looking forelimbs. So this is a type of lizard called an Amphibian. This genus Bipes. These are actually from Baja California in North America. And these guys are burrowing little reptiles. And they've again, you can see they've completely lost their hind limbs. And this is what allows them to be such good burrowers. If you want to find these guys, you're never going to see them on the surface. You basically have to dig underground. And down there in Baja California, you'll find these guys. You're digging a foundation for a home. If you're really lucky, you might come across some of these little weirdo Bipes. Another thing to look at is eyes are covered with scales. So if you're living underground, you don't really need to see too well. And they also have that tiny little mouth. That tiny little mouth is perfect for eating the type of food that they like. They love to eat social insects like ants and termites, and they can just gobble them up with that tiny mouth. What is this? What the heck is this? Okay, now if I showed you this, when I show this to most people, the first guess is a big worm. It looks like a big old earthworm, right? It's got the rings. You're not seeing any eyes. It's hard to see if there's even a mouth. It looks like a giant earthworm. For all the world, that looks like a big old earthworm. It's not an earthworm. It's not even an invertebrate. This is actually a weird type of amphibian called a caecilian. And caecilians are a burrowing and fossorial, meaning living in the ground, in the leaf litter, and underground, kind of amphibian. So this thing is related to frogs and salamanders. Now, when we look at this thing, we see this thing is all adaptations, right? It's lost its limbs. So the limbs have completely been lost over evolutionary time. This makes it easy for it to burrow into the soil. It also has, if we look at the head closely, again, you're not seeing any eyes there. Okay, the reason for that is that eyes are covered with a layer of skin. And if you look really closely, you might see some tiny little pigmented spots on there. But again, this is a burrowing species. It doesn't really need its eyes. And what these guys do is they're crawling around underground. They're feeding mostly on worms. And they do have a mouth, too. Almost looks like it's smiling there if you get close enough. So this little weird legless amphibian related to salamanders and frogs has completely lost its limbs, has covered its eyes up with a protective layer. They have very specialized skulls for burrowing through the soil, and super, super blunt little tails, or if any tail at all. This is one of the it's hard to imagine an animal that just speaks to adaptation more than this thing, right? It's been completely modified from what you'd think a salamander or a frog or a normal amphibian should look like for this highly specialized existence living underground.